my. Welcome to Splitting Hairs and Sarah Curro Interviews, our very first joint attempt.
I know.
And
I'm always in the comments section, sorry. I've never actually been on it.
I know, and in true form, Annabelle interrupts the first thing I say. Anyway, the reason it's so appropriate that we do a joint interview today is that we have the most amazing guest on the show. I discovered her. She popped up into my feed somehow, and I clicked on, and I couldn't believe there weren't 7 million subscribers yet. So, Sister Ursuline, thank you so much for joining us here on Splitting Hairs / Sarah Curro Interviews.
Welcome.
Having me. Hello.
Now, since we're going to deconstruct that video in its entirety, that's why the intro was short. So Annabelle has, as usual, composed the most beautiful list of questions for our guest. So Annabelle, throw it to you.
Okay, so just a quick backstory. You found this video of Sister Ursuline's you're reacting to some other video, and we're going to react to that reacting to another reaction. So before we do any of that, can you just tell us your backstory around music and what do you do as well?
Yeah. So
Who are you?
I don't know. So what I do now is I loop the cello live and I sing at the same time, and I sometimes loop the vocals as well. So I write a lot about historical narrative and historical characters and things like that. But I actually started on the violin, so I played violin for 5 years, mostly Irish jigs and fiddle stuff, and then very briefly moved to piano because I wanted to sing and accompany myself, and then I discovered that you could sing and play the cello because I really love the strings, and I jumped ship again, and that's what I've been doing since.
Wow.
So let's be clear here. You're not from a classical background, is that correct?
I was trained classically, but it was never classical music that influenced me to take up the cello at all.
Which is
Okay,
interesting.
so
I want to
at
get to
what-
that point later.
Well, at what point did you realise that even though you were being trained classically, at what point were you like, nah, not interested?
Honestly, I had really only about a year of classical training on the cello before I went to the conservatorium in Newcastle.
Oh.
And the conservatorium was at a strange kind of crossroads at the time because they really were trying to appeal to contemporary players, but they still had a very, very classical mindset, completely classical training. So I think I got in under the guise of, we really want to appeal to contemporary students, but the teaching, the lecturers, the setup was completely classical. So I was there for maybe 3 years, but the pressure of a conservatorium environment when I had only been playing for a year, I couldn't read music. We were playing, we were playing symphony pieces and stuff like that. So it was really bad for me because I ended up getting very injured, and I quit the cello for 3 years after that experience.
Wow.
That was my main classical experience as a conservatorium.
And did you study a Bachelor of Music or what was your degree that you did?
Yeah, Bachelor of Music in Cello Performance.
I studied for a little bit in Tasmania and doing classical violin, but there was a divide between, contemporary, like Bachelor of Music, and then the classical ones. And I remember our first semester theory subject was all the musicians, all the students, and then second semester you broke away into like classical sort of theory and then the contemporary theory, and the numbers dropped completely in our class because there was such a divide and stuff, and there was only one contemporary violinist. Everybody else was classical. It was just interesting though.
So you've had a traumatic experience basically through classical music. So you're welcome. And so Annabelle and I were talking about the reaction video that you made, and we wondered what led you to being so triggered to use.
But you were on point about it as well.
Well, you were kind of triggered enough to make this reaction video, which we're going to link in the description, obviously. You were so triggered, but at the same time, you felt it really necessary to explain yourself rather than just put down this person who's obviously a symptom of the classical mentality.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about it. Everything you said was so right, but at the same time, you backed it up with complete technical accuracy on so many levels. And you're really
articulate about, because sometimes we just rambling and we make our point eventually. But
sometimes.
Spoke really well as well. So.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So can we get into that video now? Annabelle, what's your first kind of Yeah.
So what the video was a classical violinist reacting to a Lindsey Stirling video, and you were reacting as a contemporary cellist to the classical violinist reacting to Lindsey Stirling. And now us, classical violinists, are going to, with you, react to all of that, which is a wormhole.
Very meta. It was pretty meta, but it's way more meta now.
But the first thing was that it was set up as, and you made this point, you're a classical violinist talking about this contemporary violinist, and there was already a divide of classical verse, like it was classical verse contemporary, like
it was already set up like a competition.
Set up as and to fail basically. So
I mean, she presented it as her job as a classical. I mean, that's kind of what got me, is it's my job to make fun. And like I said, maybe it was a joke, but it really wasn't, like what came to follow was, I'm going to judge her and this is why it's bad.
And I wrote that, I quoted on my notes you saying that because you said basically, no, it's not your job. That's first of all, that's it. And then for me, that quote of that woman, who I don't blame, and I'm not putting on anything on her, but that's the epitome of this elitist mindset of the classical world, which we're in, and I love. But it's this, and you said it when you spoke about a hierarchy of classical up here, everything else underneath, and everything's compared to classical. And as much as I love this, I've had that mindset of that woman, but it's so wrong.
Yeah, you see how passionate we are about this video that you've made. This video, everybody needs to see this video because you did it really respectfully, and we're so passionate about it that we're not letting you get a word in. And we're really sorry, but we want to show you that we completely sympathise, we completely understand how you must have been affected by people in our industry enough to do it. So what was the final straw for you? What made you spend your time reacting to this video?
I could see, I found that video in a Facebook group of creative string players. So this person who is, classical, presenting herself as classical, came into that space of creative contemporary players and dropped this video. And I could, I wasn't necessarily that offended by that. I think she's probably trolling for views, and she got them. You go to her video before she took it down. Got those views. But everyone was really upset, and I think a lot of people were upset and they couldn't really express why. It was, this isn't fair, and why are you doing this, and all of that kind of thing. And I wanted to provide an alternative to what she was saying, but I really wanted to focus on not attacking her.
It was a polite rebuttal.
Yeah, but I can see that she is attacking Lindsey Stirling. It's a little more personal, but I think one of the least useful things you can do on the internet is to talk about how you personally feel about something as subjective as music. Like, who cares what I personally feel about a style? It's completely irrelevant. Like, what are those musicians trying to achieve? What is the value system in that style of music? So for her to come in and lay this classical value system over contemporary music, I just really wanted to focus on, like, here are her knowledge gaps, because they're very obvious if you're a contemporary player, and here's why what she's saying doesn't apply. And I thought there was space to do that. So
absolutely. And in a way, it's not about Lindsey Stirling or any pop artists at all, because when I was in Australian Youth Orchestra, I had two friends. One was called Hayley Ecker and one was Tanya Davis. And guess what they did after they graduated? They were 2 out of the 4 of the Bond Electric String Quartet. Now, Hayley was playing concertos. Hayley was on that trajectory to being a success, if you will, in the classical sphere, which basically at best usually means we end up getting a job in the second violins of a symphony orchestra somewhere. That's what a success is. But she's an exceptional violinist. Tanya is the same. She was a great violinist, and she decided to play the viola in that quartet. I was ecstatic for these girls. I was like, this is going to go off. And it did. Bond was so successful.
I was obsessed with them when I was younger.
You were obsessed with them. They were fun. It was just hilarious. It was great. And they threw themselves into it. It was just something that they could be proud of. But I don't know anyone else in my industry that were proud of them. They thought they were a sellout, or they were disappointed for them that they weren't playing Tchaikovsky concerto anymore, what?
Yeah.
So I've always felt this nastiness towards, as you said in your video, commercial success being viewed as not a success in the classical world. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were just talking before the podcast about how I'm not American, like shocker. I have this accent. I know everyone thinks I'm American, but from touring in the US, this idea, I mean, I think this idea is probably global, but to look at, I don't know how much this plays into the Australian culture around success and striking out and tall poppy syndrome, cut it down, But in the US, there's a different attitude of like, oh, you're a musician? Amazing. What's your socials? Who are you? What do you do? Yep. The attitude here is, oh, you're a musician, but what's your real job?
Oh, we've done that episode. Oh my gosh. We even titled it, so what do you really do for a living? That's exactly, oh my gosh.
Yeah. But I feel like, part of it ties into that. Like, that's nice, this is all fluffy and everything. It's commercial success, but like, what's the real of what you do? It's kind of the same with classical. Like, classical music is the meat, and this is all just fluffy hand waving, and you get some money, but like, it's not, the attitude is like, it doesn't hold any weight.
And what do you think perpetrates this attitude? I mean, obviously we've done a few different episodes. For example, dealers are going to be benefiting from the sale of super old instruments, so they have to create a mythology around that. But who's benefiting from this attitude that only a classical musician is a success somehow?
And only a classical musician that, say, plays in an orchestra or solos or has a quartet at a certain level.
Yeah, it's who's doing it and who's benefiting? Have you thought about why it's like this still?
I think it ties into so many attitudes. I mean, and I don't know, I kind of don't want to even say it, but part of it is xenophobic as well. Part of it is colonial, that white European music is this higher up thing, and world music lumped into world music. I mean, even that I feel is really problematic. What is world music? Just everything else? Whatever it's folk or it's just awful. But I think part of it is that it's this institution that has emerged out of Europe, and the music is part of that xenophobia, really. But classical musicians benefit from that because classical music is not as popular, perhaps, or it's not the standard as much as it once was.
Do you think given that it's classical music but titled Western art, so we're talking about Western history here, that it's been in the Western world the dominant music across, and it's developed through all these different eras. It's always been there that it has been so dominant that we've now pushed it up to the top over those years.
Yeah.
But also other cultures aspire to it, unfortunately. Other cultures abandon their own culture to aspire to the Western ideal of high art. And that's a real shame because it means they abandon their own culture for what? They have their own culture and they're letting it go for the Louis Vuitton handbag or the Gucci hat or something. It's really sad what's happening, and I still don't know who's benefiting from it. I just see it's a real problem.
It's all right. I think part of that, I think if you're looking at minorities or different cultures who are aspiring to be part of classical music, you do have to kind of look at it's part of assimilating into the dominant culture. So we can't really blame them for that. It's normal that they try to assimilate, or that if that's the standard that you're given, then that's what you'll aspire to. But you also have to think of, through time, how many cultures have been banned from their musical traditional practices. They weren't allowed to sing. They weren't allowed to dance. All kinds of things like that as well. Oh, I'm sorry, that's my...
Oh, it's not my Sarah.
We're live. It's splitting hairs. I'm sending you secret messages. I'm actually not.
I don't know if there's one entity that benefits from that other than classical music itself. And kind of ties into what you said about dealers. You create this idea of scarcity and of value, and then people believe that it's valuable, and it's also part of that, I think.
Yeah, they do that in every industry. They do that in the makeup industry. The Kylie Jenner lip kit is always out of
Louis Vuitton. Louis Vuitton can import or other brands like that, all of their materials, but if it's assembled in France, then it's made in France, or
Yeah.
assembled in Italy. So that
Yeah.
product might come from another country, but it's assembled in there and then it's made in. And it's just deception. But
Yeah, it is deception. But I mean, look, we can do positive things to change that. And your video is a really positive step to making people question why they have their own attitudes too. So I'm working on sending this video to really key people. There's one person in my orchestra, I've already discussed him with you in our first email correspondence, who no matter what, he sits down and he complains about what we're about to play. It doesn't matter what it is. Actually, I've thought about it since our email. It doesn't matter what it is. It could actually be Tchaikovsky, and he'd complain about that because it's too boring. So I've war texted him. I don't know. Maybe it's a general level of dissatisfaction which just leads people to bring everything down because they feel bad. I'm feeling bad, so everyone else needs to feel bad. Well, girls, I think we've got to fight this.
I'm a weird case because I find as much like for me it's not either or either. It's like classical or contemporary. I'm just obsessed with. I have an appreciation for music.
Yeah,
whether
you're
I don't
good like
like
that.
it or not. So I'm a weird case because I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, awesome. Even if I don't really like that music, there's something in it that I'll like, because I'll easily nerd out over Beethoven and Tchaikovsky and then something else, whatever it is. So
Oh yeah.
it's when I see people, and I'll use violins as an example. People that believe they have to have an old Italian violin, and that's it. And for me, it's like, you can think that that's fine, but have you at least tried everything else first and then gone? And I still like that. That's fine. It means you've tried things first. But the people, back to contemporary versus classical, if you haven't listened to other things, if you haven't had a go at other things, then you're sort of sheltering yourself up, you're blocking yourself off, and it's just like you're missing out on just trying stuff. And when I was at uni, like, it was obviously classical dominated, and I found out the hard way that you should stick to the standard repertoire for your recitals, because
You'll get punished.
But I did gamelan classes as well. I mean, they were, I did Baroque ensemble on a Baroque violin. So there's stuff in there, but it's this much of the university structure, and it's this much of what's out there, and it's just like, I agree, calling it world versus classical is ridiculous.
Yeah, but at the same time, if we don't teach classical music properly, that is all the way back to, say, the medieval period, sacred music plus secular music plus the folk music that was developing at the time. If we don't teach all of that properly and historically, then people do tend to get very tunnel visioned about what's good music, and it always ends up being the Austro-Germanic tradition of the 19th century. That's usually what people get sort of excited about. There's just so much other music. Alan Bell, we're talking too much. We have to ask Sister Ursuline about something so she can actually talk.
Yeah. This is exactly what it is. Words and things.
So we'll just say very quickly, I was going to make another video kind of about what you're saying about the violins, in terms of you must have an old European instrument. And this is a Chinese cello, and I love it, and it's not worth very much money, and I don't care what you think. But when I was at the con, that was not acceptable. Acceptable. Never achieve what you had to achieve. Yeah. And that's so much pressure as well, again, with the privilege of you need to spend $10,000 to $20,000 on your instrument.
Good link there, because it's what you said in your video about, I will rarely use the word privilege outside of what I believe to be proper context. And there is privilege in classical world to make, to have it in your education, and therefore to make a career out of it. I mean, I think that music is so valuable, but we're not doctors, okay? But the social, the cultural, and the economic privilege to be able to learn an instrument, especially from a young age, to have parents pay, your way until you decide to go to university and get your own instrument and then make a career out of it. It's like that alone sets people apart. And I've been a violin teacher, and I've seen in different areas we're in Melbourne, right? So different areas of Melbourne where there have been generations of parents and teachers and students at some schools where they have had those generation years of putting music into those schools for music education, and areas where there's none. They haven't had the time, but not being able to fill up a class of students for music. There's no music class at all, versus you must play an instrument for at least some of these years, and that's just Melbourne, and so that is a privilege to be able to have any sort of music in your life at all. So it's,
yeah, you seem upset, Annabelle. Are you all right?
it bothers me.
I know, it bothers me too. It's really, look, this girl who took her video down, it's not about her, but she's obviously feeling upset as well. And that's the thing we have to remember. She was probably quite annoyed at the very existence of someone like Lindsay Stirling, because Lindsay Stirling's small and cute and young and hot and a dancer and can play, and she's doing all this modern stuff. And that girl who commented, that's probably so out of her comfort zone that she has to bring it down because she can't do it. So, and again, I'm not saying anything against this girl, but it's this awful attitude of, well, I would never do something like that. So that's just awful. So I'm going to make a whole video about how bad it is. And the way she didn't even identify that that was a Stroh violin. That was one of the early attempts at making an electric violin. That's really cool. That's cool what she did.
But, you know, I mean, I don't really like Lindsay Stirling's music, but that's completely beside the point.
It's not,
what she's done is she's found a style and something unique to her, found a niche, and I guarantee you she's got a younger audience that maybe have only ever seen violins in orchestras and certain ways, and, you know, and there it is in a completely different setting and making it more accessible as well.
Let's talk about your style. How has your style really grown? Because I've got your Patreon now.
Same.
There's Patreon, there's albums, there's EPs, there's all this beautiful
I
stuff.
listened to it all before.
Oh, it's just divine. So how has that kind of grown over the years?
Well, the band that got me into the cello is called Rasputina. So they're a three-piece cello band, originally three-piece with drums from Brooklyn, really weird kind of arty music, spoken word, all of that kind of stuff. And they were putting distortion on the cello. And they were certainly not the first people to do that, but it was the first time I had ever heard it or seen it. And it took me a lot. I'd been listening to them for a long time before I realized that's the cello. That's the cello with distortion. You can do that. Like, this is amazing, you know? And just the three cellos together, I think, is a really powerful instrumentation as well. So that's really what got me into writing the kind of music that I started writing, is just, I can do this all myself. I'm going to do it all on the cello because I can, you know? And the looping came later when I started performing, because I really wanted to represent the songs as I had written them and as I heard them. And it just has become this self-sustaining bubble that I exist in now.
That's beautiful.
That's cool.
And you can't, but it's hard to pay other people too. So it's really important to get the whole vibe of the songs without having to put, because, you know, we do spend a lot of money on our, on this kind of creative stuff. Yeah.
And if you're independent, you cannot afford, you know, I don't want to ask musicians to play for free. I'll play for free starting out, but I'm not going to ask other people to do that. And I cannot pay you. So if I can do it myself, I'll do it. Like, that's how, you know, you have to kind of work with what we have.
That goes to
sorry, go ahead.
It goes to one of the things you said in your video, which was if we have these narratives over or these attitudes towards types of music that what do you say, we start shortchanging ourselves, and then, like, there's already this downward pressure. What did you say? Downward pressure on artists, and then we're helping to we're adding to this, and therefore we're not taken seriously when it comes to you know, our pay rates and stuff. And we've done the same thing. We've spoken about exposure doesn't, you know, pay the bills. So we're adding to this while at the same time saying take us seriously, and it's
So talk about that point you made, because that was fantastic. Yep.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, we're all out here trying to make a living with music. We're all out here saying we deserve to be paid. This is a real job. We are providing a service. And I think really people don't maybe understand how valuable music is in their lives, because it is so accessible now on the internet. You can stream, it's free. No one wants to pay for a show, whatever. But then, like you said, with Bond, that band is commercially successful, which means they're getting paid well. They're doing well. They're with a label. And then we go, no, that's not really, like, legitimate. I don't like that style of music. They're sellouts, because it's obvious to us how they're getting paid. It's commercial. They have a brand. Whereas with a classical musician who perhaps doesn't have a brand in the same sense, it's okay because they're part of a symphony, and, like, yeah, they get paid, but we don't think about it very much. I think it's the same way that people get uncomfortable with Kickstarter and Patreon and stuff like that, with a musician saying, hey, I need money to do this. Will you give me money to do this? And then we're like, you shouldn't rely on other people's money if you want to make art, but we want your art. But we have this very strange mentality about...
Do you find that people are weird about Patreon?
I haven't personally found that, but I have seen so much of that online. You know, I just even recently, there was a musician who was funding an EP, and I think she set her Kickstarter at $20,000. Not unreasonable to professionally record, mix, and master an EP. You have engineers, you have a studio. People perhaps don't understand what goes into the time it takes to create a piece of work like that. And the comment section is full of people saying, you shouldn't be begging for money. You should fund this yourself. Like all of the, you know, chase your dreams, but do it on your own steam.
Oh, gross.
There is this weird wider attitude of like, I want the music, but I don't want to pay for it. But like, how dare you ask me for money? Because I think it destroys the mysticism of this idea that we just love music.
Yes!
Just do it for free.
Yes!
We do because we do, but we shouldn't, and we shouldn't have to.
That's a beautiful myth. Isn't that hilarious? It's like, well, I love it sometimes, but I don't get to choose the repertoire. I don't get to choose who I sit next to. I don't choose the conductor. I don't choose when I do it. I'm not creative.
The reality of orchestras is you might love the idea of playing in an orchestra, but that you might like the idea of it. The reality of it is, I'm rostered on how many weeks in a row, and it's this plus
notes,
this plus people plus it's 2 rehearsals, 3 rehearsals, and
so
concerts,
many
and
notes.
It's like you don't have a choice on it, but you paid to do it.
And literally, your creative brain dies because the reading brain is like really enlarged and enhanced, and you're constantly in that page. And the creative brain just sort of shrinks over time. The memory brain dies as well. I can't memorize 3 lines of music anymore, you know.
It's funny you said the effort that goes into creating a really solid EP is the point that I think a comparison I notice with the video and what you said, which is there's a difference in the way, I say, a soloist with an orchestra puts together a concerto and then goes up on stage, plays it for memory, one hit perfectly, you think, and performs it. And then there's, say, how Lindsey Stirling would prepare her video, which would have taken the music plus the choreography plus the recording plus any tweaking or effects, all of that. It's like the classical mindset is to value that kind of thing and the more complicated music and all of that. And then, but that takes just as much effort, but it's a different kind of effort. And it's just these just bizarre comparisons. That's the whole point of, contemporary and classical is there's just equal amounts of work and effort and art and creativity and all of that goes into both of them. And we're viewing one as more, important than the other. And that really bothered me when I realized that. And I was just like, that's amazing over here, but that's still equally as...
Yeah. But, I think that's part of the knowledge gap is that it seems so obvious if you've played contemporary or if you've made a video clip or done any of those things, which contemporary artists tend to do more than perhaps classical, is that this is a movie set that they're on. It might only be a 3-minute, film, but it is a full-blown movie set. They have crews, they have makeup, hair, costume, the actual set building, post-production, totally separate recording in a studio. It's an enormous amount of work that requires an enormous amount of funding, hence it is commercial. But to compare something like that, the product of probably days or weeks of actors, choreographers, like you say, all of that, to a live performance of a classical musician is absurd. But I think that happens because there's this huge knowledge gap as to how this thing came to exist over here, Lindsey Stirling's video. But that's, you can't compare these things in any sense, but that's what happens,
The other one was the technique playing. Obviously, she's on a completely different instrument. And now we're comparing 2 different instruments. And some people look at, say, Bond and their Yamahas and go, oh, okay. But it's like you look at them and they are using those instruments, but that's more of a prop to their look for their group. And Lindsey Stirling obviously picked... It's like, like the sound you want to create will ask for a certain type of instrument. And it's just like... We're then already assuming that acoustic is superior to electric.
Yeah.
And it's nasty.
Yeah.
It's not true because
that's the thing.
the answer is this is all subjective, and that's pretty much it. That's it.
The quote of all quotes in this video is the only bad sound.
Yes, I had that written down.
The only bad sound is the sound you don't intend.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
That is such a great thing to say. Oh, God.
But it's, it's just so simple. And you have to look at all of these things. And what are you trying to achieve is the only question you need to ask of yourself and of other.
And how you want to achieve it, which might require certain types of technology or not. You wanted to do loops. You're going to need a loop pedal for that.
Yeah.
And to learn how to use it. I don't know anything about that. That's cool.
Really simple. It's not that. It looks very magical, but it's all just timing. But I mean, like this particular YouTuber, there was another review that she did of a different violinist, and I let it go into the ether. But she had a lot of really similar comments of like, where's the rest of the violin? Because he was playing an electric cutout kind of violin. It's really interesting that she makes these weird little snipey comments at things like that, not understanding that if you're playing a giant stadium, you do not want an acoustic.
You can't reach.
You're going to have, you can't project, you can't reach, you're going to have massive, massive feedback because of all of the vibrations that you don't get in an electric instrument. So it's just the knowledge gap, I think, is like, I understand why you think that this is a really weird thing, but you're not understanding what they're trying to achieve, which is playing to 20,000 people in a stadium, not a concert hall with built-in acoustics,
Yeah. And like putting that in the classical world, we have that same thing of, an older instrument is therefore better.
Yeah.
Or how old is it? I like knowing that anyway, but I don't come from it of the mindset of if it's older, it's therefore better. It's just rubbish.
But did you ever think that before you met me? Did you ever think
me?
Old? Yeah. Did you ever think old is got to be better, just because of what you'd heard from older people?
I definitely had this awe about Stradivari instruments, but it was never they're automatically better. Because I always asked my friend this, and this is a really dumb thing to ask, but I said, if you got handed a Stradivari, but it was on loan, or would you rather own one that's some sort of the equivalent? What would you want? And I'd always, what would you rather? I'd always go for I want to own it. That was the second thing. I don't want to have an instrument on loan. It's not mine. I can't muck around with it. That was that. But it was never a must own that. I never really thought older was better, but I was sort of more like the craftsmanship of it. And I've seen like one of the best violins I ever played was made in 1901. It's like, that's not old compared to what's available. So not really, but I'm still a nerd about it where I'm just like, ooh, I want to see, I want to watch.
Yeah, but that's like going into the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg and just looking at all this old stuff that's still around. It was so beautifully made. It's like, oh, wow, that's just happened such a long time ago and it's still here, because you get buildings made now that are bulldozed in or should be bulldozed in 10 years now. So the idea that something has lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years, it is easy to put the kind of mystical, magical, whoa, how did Stradivari do it? But actually they all had assistants. They didn't just sit there by themselves. And that's something that, again, there's that knowledge gap you're talking about. It doesn't occur to people that Stradivari had heaps of people helping him out. Can you just do that scroll? Thanks, So anyway, getting off topic. I always get off topic. Sorry. So now, what would you say to this girl if you met her?
I really want to know what, I mean, it might be as simple as YouTube algorithm, but if it's not, I really want to know what she thought she would achieve in making a review like that. Like, are you wanting to devalue this artist? Do you feel threatened? Why did you make that? Why? Because as well, there's this thing with YouTube. It's this mysticism of like, I made a reaction and it just appeared on the internet and I didn't have time to think about what I was doing. You film it for hours, you edit it for hours. I mean, I edited that thing for like 3 days straight. I had a lot of time watching myself say the same stuff over and over again. To think about what am I releasing, what's happening. So this girl was, engaging with what she was saying a lot more than just doing the reaction and posting it, So presumably maybe had time to think about it. So why did you make it? What were you trying to achieve in making this video other than views?
Yeah, well, maybe that's as simple as that. She's just doing a sort of nasty little thing to get our reaction. Well, she won. She won today's little skirmish.
True, but for me, it's not about her. It's that, like, she's, as we said before, the symptom of what's already going on, which is, and this is what really, 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 really gets me, is these beliefs, all this kind of crap in the classical world. It's being taught to younger generations of classical music students. And I'm sorry, but the reason why I really turned off of them was because they flipped on some of the stuff that they say, stuff that we disagree with, and they've got such a young audience.
Yeah.
And they're going to have 13-year-olds like, oh, $10 million Strads on the table, like, oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, no violin has a $10 million sound.
Yeah,
you know, and there's other stuff, but it's for me, it's that the younger kids are gonna
get brainwashed.
I do that because I was that. I used to look at Lindsay Stirling a certain way about, like, oh, okay, I don't really like that, and I was all of the stuff I'm not now in that regard. And it's just, that's what really, really bothers me, is that there's more, students are like, oh, older instruments, and and
it's always in the delivery too. It's always how confidently someone delivers something, which makes a person who's easily influenced, that person will just automatically believe what they're hearing. There's not enough healthy skepticism about these crazy statements, like pop music doesn't matter, it's not music. Like what did she say? She said basic.
That was the other thing that I wanted to.
Oh, that really got me. Yeah.
God, you were just the way you edited that part of the video was so good. It was just like you couldn't get off the word basic. It was sensational.
But then you articulated it really well with, she obviously meant that in a negative connotation. Because as soon as she went to basic, I thought, hold on, more complicated music's not necessarily better. I'm obsessed with Philip Glass's No. 3 quartet, and the last movement is just crotchets and triplets and arpeggios, and that's it. But it's stunning to me, and that's the whole minimalist movement, yes.
I think the thing that got me is that she didn't quantify anything that she said. She just said it's basic but fun, and then a little snip or whatever, and then we're gone. What do you mean? What do you mean by basic? Why is it basic? What are you talking about when you say basic? But she didn't explain anything. And honestly, that made my job really easy, because I could go in and say, well, what does basic mean? It could mean 17 things. Which one of those things does it mean?
Yeah.
And so that kind of ties into, why are you uploading this? You're not actually making many points. You're not even expressing what you really think if you say basic.
Yeah.
Me, I just couldn't.
I'm just wondering what Lindsay Stirling would. I mean, someone sent me. Was it you who sent me some fundraising video where Lindsay Stirling became an avatar in virtual reality, and it's just amazing concert where it's completely looks like a video game, and there's music and she's playing, and she raised some ridiculous amount of money for some great cause. It's like, what's this girl doing? Like, how is she contributing using her music? Where are her concerts? Where are her fundraising concerts? Where are her, Cancer Awareness Day concerts or Save the Trees and whatever? What's she doing to make the world a better place with her superior classical music? So that's what annoyed me. It's like, what's she doing?
Yeah, it's one thing to criticize, but it's like, criticism's easy to just throw out there, but can you back it up? And I don't want to come off like we're not backing it up, but I think we are. And
we often come across like we don't back it up. Like we're quite opinionated. We try, but we liked your video because there was some really substantial points that really added weight to what you were saying.
Yeah, I think when you need to have like your evidence to back up what it is, and the teachers one's a great one. We had documentation. Otherwise, if we're very clearly saying this is opinion, then it's opinion. But it's easy to throw out, criticism out there and not have anything. What's the gain of it? And that's the thing about comparison. And we spoke about that in an interview we just did with a friend of ours, which is to compare something is either to pull someone down and lift you up, or lift someone else up and pull you down. So it's going to hurt someone either way.
Yeah.
And people that get super famous celebrities, they'll all say don't read comment sections.
Speaking of tall poppy syndrome and being Australian, let's talk about how you're actually Australian. Let's talk about how I was obsessing with, okay, is she Canadian? Because there's some reference to Sister Ursuline, like some Canadian reference, but she could be American, and I don't want to offend her. You're actually Australian. Okay, background.
Yeah.
I grew up in Sydney. I was born in Sydney. I don't know. I never know where it's from. I've always had an accent, and people, for as long as I can remember, have always asked me where I'm from, and I don't know. But I did tour in the States for maybe 4 months, so my accent definitely got worse, kind of by accident and also on purpose, because Americans, I love them, but they cannot understand other accents.
True.
So I had to change how I was speaking at times. But I don't know. I don't know where it's from.
Well, look, I've absolutely loved meeting you. I was so nervous to meet you. I felt like you were so smart compared to me. Annabelle's pretty smart. She probably didn't feel like that. But I just want to really thank you for letting us get into your head like this. And I just want to really thank you because you've changed my life, actually. I know that sounds really sucky and but it's really reinforced what I think I can speak for Annabelle. It's reinforced what we are trying to do with this Splitting Hairs channel and for my Sarah Curro Interviews channel. I just am dying to support amazing, fantastic people making beautiful content. So Annabelle, do you want to say anything to our darling guest?
I just love that you made that video because then Sarah found it and then I saw it and it backs up what we were already thinking. It's so interesting that you're not in the classical world and you notice this, and it's like, I don't think, and I don't mean to sound like a total prick, but like we didn't come up with these ideas that we disagree with. They're like, it's just, we're just recording it and putting it out there. But it was so like great to meet you, and I did join your Patreon and I did listen to your music, and it's just yeah, I mean, I really like your music. But I had an idea. Let's finish this, record an extra 10 minutes, and that can go on your Patreon for your Patreon.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, perfect.
So let's end this and then...
Yeah. And so stay on the line. Look, thank you so much, and I love your work. Thank you.